The last hours on the Titanic, the passenger manifest for third class on the Titanic, reads like an atlas of desperation and hope. Irish families from Cork and Mayo, where America meant hope. Young Swedish and Norwegian men traveling alone to find work. Lebanese and Syrian families, some speaking no English. And Eastern Europeans, Poles, Slovaks, Croatians, who had saved for years just to afford a ticket. Most of them had never been on a ship before. Most of them were making the journey of their lives. On the night of April 14th, 1912, they were 2 days from New York. The collision at 11:40 p.m. was not what most people imagine. The iceberg didn't slam into Titanic, it grazed it, tearing roughly 300 feet along the starboard bow below the waterline. Inside, survivors described it as a shudder, a scraping vibration that traveled through the floors, walls, and metal bunk frames. Then the engines stopped. The Titanic had never been quiet at sea. The constant thrum of engines running 24 hours a day was the baseline of life on board. So pervasive that most passengers stopped consciously hearing it within the first day. Its absence was louder than any alarm. In third class, the initial reaction was not panic, it was curiosity. People sat up in their bunks, put their heads into corridors, asked the person in the next berth if they'd felt it. A few passengers on the lower decks reported seeing a physical surge of water enter the corridor before any alarm was raised, before any crew member had appeared, before any instruction had been given. For the majority of third-class passengers, the first hour after the collision was characterized by a single experience: waiting. No crew member was assigned to systematically evacuate third class. There was no protocol. No announcement came in their language. No one knocked on berth doors with a clear instruction about what to do and which direction to go. What came eventually was a steward, sometimes one steward, covering an area that held hundreds of people, delivering a message that passengers should put on their lifebelts and come up on deck. Which deck was not always specified. The Titanic was 882 feet long and 175 feet tall. Its internal layout was a deliberate labyrinth of corridors, stairways, and class barriers. Third-class passengers, who had been permitted access to only their own section of the ship for the entire voyage, faced a route to the boat deck that required navigating multiple flights of stairs, corridors that ran in directions they had no mental map of, and passages through sections of the ship they had never entered. The ship, during this first hour, was tilting forward. Slowly, not yet visibly to the eye, but measurably to the feet. A persistent wrongness in the angle of the floor. Loose objects sliding, water appearing in places water had no reason to be. The passengers who moved quickly and found their way upward were the ones who had some chance. The passengers who waited for clear instruction, waiting because that is what you do, because that is what the crew is for, because surely someone is coming to tell you what to do, were waiting for something that was not coming in time. Third-class passengers moving upward through the ship encountered gates. Iron gates fitted across stairwells and corridor junctions at the boundaries between third and second class. They had been there for the entire voyage. Standard White Star Line equipment required under US immigration law to prevent the spread of contagious disease between classes during the Atlantic crossing. Some of these gates were unlocked by stewards during the sinking. Some were not. Some were unlocked too late, after the passengers who had been standing at them, pressing against them, had already dispersed back into the lower decks. Survivor testimony on this point is consistent and specific. Olaus Abelseth, a 25-year-old Norwegian farmer traveling to South Dakota, testified that he and a group of passengers were held at a gate by crew members telling them to go back, to wait, to stay where they were. They eventually climbed over or around barriers and made their own route up. Others did not find a way through. Beyond the gates, even for passengers who passed them, was a navigation problem nobody had prepared them for. Corridors that looked identical in every direction. Stairways that led to the wrong deck. Signs in English in a crowd where many people read neither English nor the Latin alphabet. The passengers who made it to the boat deck were the ones who moved early, moved fast, found someone who knew the route, or were simply lucky in the direction they chose. The last lifeboat left the Titanic at approximately 2:05 a.m. Most third-class passengers who successfully navigated to the boat deck arrived after that. What they found was a sloped, increasingly chaotic deck with no lifeboats attached to it. The davits, the metal arms that had held the boats, still extended over the side of the ship, now empty, cables hanging loose, a crowd of people, officers with revolvers, The bow of the ship visibly, definitively submerged. Some passengers jumped, some held each other and did not jump, some climbed onto the stern as it rose out of the water, the natural human instinct to get as high as possible, to stay out of the water as long as possible, playing out on a structure that was itself sinking. The stern of the Titanic rose to a near vertical angle before the ship broke in two at approximately 2:17 a.m. The people on it were thrown, or fell, or held on until they went under with it. 1,500 people entered the water. The lifeboats, carrying 710 survivors, many of them with space remaining, rowed away from them. The North Atlantic on the night of April 14, 1912, was 28 degrees Fahrenheit, below the freezing point of freshwater. A person entering water at 28 degrees undergoes cold shock within the first 30 seconds, an involuntary gasp reflex that opens the airway and fills the lungs, a spike in heart rate that in people with underlying cardiac vulnerability can produce immediate arrest. For those who survive cold shock, swimming failure follows. The muscles of the arms and legs lose function progressively. The ability to keep the head above water diminishes within 10 to 15 minutes and is gone entirely within 30. In 28-degree water, most people are dead within 15 to 30 minutes. Officers in several lifeboats refused to return, fearing being swamped by desperate survivors. Fifth Officer Lowe eventually went back. He found 4 people alive. Survivors in the lifeboats described the sound that came from the water after the ship went down. Screaming, 1,500 voices, loud enough to be heard clearly at a distance of several hundred yards across flat, still water. It lasted approximately 15 minutes, then it went quiet. Not gradually, quickly, because the cold does not take its time. Then the water was silent and the night was silent, and the lifeboats floated in darkness, surrounded by 1,500 people who were no longer making any sound. Of the 710 people in third class who boarded at Southampton, 174 survived. The majority of those who died were not killed by the iceberg. They were not killed by the sinking itself. They were killed by the distance between where they slept and where the lifeboats were, and by everything: the gates, the corridors, the missing instructions, the boats that left early, the boats that didn't come back. That made that distance in the end impossible to cross. The 15 minutes of screaming from the water, and then the silence, is documented by multiple survivors in the lifeboats. Several said it was the sound they never stopped hearing for the rest of their lives. What do you think it would have taken to go back?